The hall was silent, the kind of silence that doesn't come from emptiness, but from anticipation, like the stillness before a storm. Delegates from across the continent sat shoulder to shoulder, journalists leaned forward with pens hovering above paper, and cameras focused on a single figure walking toward the podium. Ibrahim Traore was not dressed like the others. Where the majority wore polished suits or ceremonial robes, he came in his simple military fatigues, the dust of his homeland still clinging to the fabric. It wasn't a performance. It was who he was, a soldier who had spent more nights under the stars of the Sahel than under the chandeliers of foreign palaces. He placed his notes on the stand, though those closest could see he barely glanced at them. His voice, calm but steady, carried across the room without the need for force. "I stand for my people," he began, "for our children's future, not for the approval of foreign powers." In that instant, the atmosphere changed. It was no longer just another speech at another summit. It was a declaration, one that seemed to pierce through decades of whispered diplomacy and land squarely in the hearts of everyone listening. But here is where the story took its unexpected turn. Thousands of miles away, in an office overlooking the Potomac River, another man was watching that very speech unfold on a screen. His name was Marcus Kane, a strategist known in Washington circles for his quiet hand in crises the public never knew existed. He watched Traore's words not with admiration, but with calculation, because he understood something that many in the room had yet to realize, that sometimes all it takes is one voice, one speech, to shift the balance of global power. And while the applause echoed in Ouagadougou, a different kind of preparation began in Washington. The kind that didn't involve cameras or cheering crowds, but encrypted phone calls, late-night dossiers, and carefully drafted headlines. For every story told on a stage, there is another being written in the shadows. That day, as Ibrahim Traore lifted his head and told the world that Africa would no longer ask permission to defend itself, he wasn't just speaking to his people. He was also speaking to those who had built entire empires on the assumption that Africa's silence would last forever. He was reminding them, and us, that history does not move in straight lines. Sometimes it bends sharply, without warning, when the right words are spoken by the right person at the right time. And that is where our story begins. The hall fell into silence, but it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the heavy, expectant stillness that hangs in the air before a storm breaks. Delegations from across the continent sat shoulder to shoulder. Journalists leaned forward with pens hovering above paper, and the lenses of cameras all turned toward a single figure making his way to the podium. Ibrahim Traore didn't dress like anyone else in the room that day. Among a sea of polished suits and ceremonial robes, he wore only simple fatigues, still carrying the red dust of the Sahel across his shoulders. There was no performance, no extravagance. This was who he was, a soldier who had spent more nights under African skies than beneath the chandeliers of foreign palaces. He placed a few notes on the stand, but those seated close enough could see he barely glanced at them. His voice, deep and steady, carried across the chamber effortlessly. "I stand for my people," he began, "for our children's future, not for the approval of foreign powers." In that instant, the atmosphere changed. This was no longer just another diplomatic address. It was a declaration, one that sliced through decades of polite silence and landed squarely in the hearts of those listening. But the ripple extended further than the hall. Thousands of miles away, in a glass-walled office overlooking the Potomac River, another man was watching that same speech on a glowing screen. His name was Marcus Kane, a political strategist well known in Washington's inner circles, famous for his quiet hand in crises the public never knew existed. He watched Traore's words not with admiration, but with calculation. Kane understood what many in that chamber had yet to realize, that sometimes all it takes is one voice, one speech, to shift the balance of global power. And while applause thundered through Ouagadougou, another kind of preparation began overseas. There were no cameras, no cheering crowds, only encrypted phone calls, thick dossiers, and headlines drafted in the shadows. For every story told on a stage, there is always another being written behind closed doors. That day, when Ibrahim Traore lifted his head and told the world that Africa would no longer ask permission to defend itself, he wasn't just speaking to his people. He was speaking to those who had built empires on the assumption that Africa's silence would last forever. And he reminded them, and us, that history does not move in straight lines. Sometimes it bends sharply, when the right words are spoken by the right person at the right moment. And that is where our story begins. Nights in the Sahel are usually calm, just the sound of desert wind hissing against corrugated roofs and the distant barking of dogs. But at precisely 2:12 a.m. that morning, the quiet in Burkina Faso's capital was shattered by an urgent call from Gao, a city across the border in Mali. The encrypted message was short and trembling. A mysterious convoy was moving under cover of darkness, slipping past checkpoints without resistance. No license plates, no transponders, no paperwork, only sealed trucks, each stamped with the logo of a European aid organization that sounded familiar. On the surface, it looked like any other humanitarian convoy, carrying food, medicine, or seed grain for communities battered by years of conflict. But something was wrong. Seasoned instincts told Traoré that this was no ordinary shipment. Why would an aid convoy travel at night, along an abandoned petroleum transport route that hadn't been used in years? Why avoid the main roads, where monitoring was easier and safer? The questions turned in his mind, each one sharpening his suspicion that behind the facade of goodwill was something far more dangerous. Traoré didn't rush. He ordered, "Deploy the drones." Silent eyes in the sky, equipped with infrared cameras, trailed the convoy. What they captured froze the command center. The cargo holds emitted steady heat, glowing unnaturally on the thermal screens. According to official paperwork, these were seeds and fertilizer, materials that should have been cold, inert, lifeless. Instead, they radiated like mobile furnaces. The truth was starting to emerge. This wasn't relief aid. This was a ghost convoy, cloaked in the language of charity, so confident it believed no one would dare stop it. But that night, inside a dim operations room in Ouagadougou, a decision was forming. One that would make history. At exactly 6:03 a.m., the lead truck of the convoy crossed into Burkina Faso. That was the moment Traoré knew. If he didn't act now, the evidence would vanish into the shadows, as it had so many times before. In a matter of seconds, he made an unprecedented call. A complete 6-hour lockdown of the northern border. No vehicle could pass. No traders, no aid organizations, no commercial trucks. Every crossing, whether a narrow dirt path or a major international highway, was sealed tight. The order shot across the country like lightning, transmitted to 12 border outposts, and relayed through 11 satellite links. Officers on duty froze for a moment. Never before had an African nation unilaterally shut down a multinational corridor without asking for permission from Western capitals. But then, one by one, they nodded. This wasn't just a command. It was a declaration of sovereignty. The outside world reacted instantly. French security advisors rang incessantly, demanding explanations. EU officials sent encrypted messages urging restraint. UN monitors warned of a looming humanitarian crisis. But every single call went unanswered. Traoré refused to pick up. His message was unmistakable. This is our land, and we decide what happens here. Picture it. A small nation, without a mighty army or a powerful economy, suddenly daring to slam the brakes on the wheels of privilege that had rolled freely across the continent for decades. It was a challenge to the very order that had defined Africa's place in the world. And more remarkable still, it came from a man who believed that dignity could not be traded for distant voices urging compromise. For 6 tense hours, the world held its breath. No one knew exactly what those trucks carried, but everyone understood this much. This was the moment Africa declared it would defend itself. And as the morning sun rose, casting gold across the dust-filled desert air, history quietly bent toward a new direction. The morning sun had barely begun to cut through the dusty haze of the Sahel when Burkina Faso's rapid response units surrounded the convoy. Tires crunched against the cracked earth, rifles clicked into place, and boots moved in rhythm with the tense breathing of men who knew this moment could define their nation's destiny. 48 soldiers from the National Anti-Smuggling Unit advanced with quiet precision, supported by forensic teams and tech experts from Ghana. No theatrics, no noise, only deliberate movements honed by discipline. At the lead truck, a specialized cold cutter was deployed. Its thin blades sliced into the container's seal without sparks, avoiding the risk of triggering hidden traps. When the steel doors finally groaned open, a wave of heat spilled out. Inside were no sacks of seed grain, no fertilizer, nothing resembling the humanitarian aid stamped on the paperwork. Instead, the dawn light caught on slabs of crystalline methamphetamine, stacked high, glittering like a mountain of poisoned glass. Over 10 tons of it. On European streets, it would fetch nearly $90 million. The silence was deafening. Everyone present understood. This wasn't just a drug bust. This was evidence of a sprawling international network, so bold it had disguised itself beneath the banner of aid. And then came something even more chilling. As the evidence was being secured, 2 sleek drones appeared overhead. Not the kind civilians buy in electronics shops, but high-altitude reconnaissance models, moving with the precision of advanced military hardware. Analysts quickly confirmed what they feared. The signal patterns matched those used by European defense contractors. The question hung heavy in the air. Without powerful protection, could such a convoy have ever dared to move so brazenly? If those drones truly belonged to foreign handlers, then this wasn't merely about drugs. It was a confrontation with forces that had long manipulated Africa from the shadows. Back in the command center, Traoré studied the footage captured by his own surveillance drones. His face betrayed no triumph, no fear, only the cold resolve of a man who knew there was no turning back. The decision was clear. This evidence would not be buried in classified files or bartered in secret deals. It would be shown to the world, and with that choice, the operation transformed. It was no longer just a military mission. It became a declaration. A declaration that Africa could face the truth, no matter how explosive that truth might be. In the dimly lit operations room, the glow of computer screens painted the tense faces of the analysts. They were tracing back every line of data linked to the seized containers. Each box carried a QR code, looking harmless, just like any shipment of agricultural supplies. But when the codes were cross-checked through international databases, the truth cut like a cold blade. These same codes had appeared on so-called legal shipments through the ports of Lagos, Nigeria, and Cotonou, Benin, in 2023. The paperwork described the cargo as post-conflict agricultural research compounds, a humanitarian-sounding label. Yet not a single agriculture ministry in the Sahel confirmed approving such imports. The trail unraveled into a maze of shell companies and faceless NGOs, with registrations in Luxembourg, Antwerp, even a hollow office in Brussels with nothing more than a mailbox. At the heart of this web stood a name designed to inspire trust: Agri Development West Africa. On paper, it was a non-profit dedicated to rebuilding war-torn farmlands. Its logo stamped every seal, its name printed on shipping tape and documents, its website carefully masked. But when Burkina Faso's cybersecurity team dug deeper, they found no staff, no real operations, only layers of dummy corporations tied to a European pharmaceutical conglomerate notorious for breaking chemical export laws. The deeper they dug, the clearer the betrayal became. Development funds rerouted through private auditors, siphoned into tax havens, official seals forged with unnerving precision. It wasn't just a criminal racket, it was a machine of deception, protected by power. What shook the officers most wasn't just the scale of money or the sophistication of the scheme. It was the betrayal of trust. The same aid corridors meant to deliver food, medicine, and hope had been weaponized as drug highways. Trucks that should have carried seeds and vaccines were now stacked with poison, destined to destroy lives far from Africa's borders. Picture a farmer in Niger, waiting months for promised fertilizer, only to find an empty warehouse because the real goods never arrived. Meanwhile, convoys wearing the logos of aid agencies rolled past, loaded instead with methamphetamine bound for European markets. When the reports were compiled, Traoré turned each page slowly, his silence heavier than any outburst. He knew he now held the most dangerous weapon of all, the truth, and to reveal it meant pointing directly at forces that had never tolerated such defiance. Still, he didn't hesitate. Every file, every code, every trail of money and shell company would be made public. No backroom deals, no whispered negotiations. In that moment, everyone in the room understood. The battle had escalated. This was no longer Burkina Faso against a criminal syndicate. This was Burkina Faso, and by extension, Africa, standing face to face with a system that had long used laws, aid, and NGO banners to cloak its crimes. The night in Ouagadougou was unusually quiet. Inside the presidential residence, lights burned late. On Traoré's desk lay thick stacks of documents, scanned contracts, shipping papers, QR code data, drone photographs. Every piece had been cross-verified with experts from Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. There was no room for doubt. One advisor hesitated. "Are you certain about publishing all of it, sir? We could hold back some details, use them for leverage." Traoré looked up, his gaze unwavering. Leverage? With whom? With those who used aid logos to smuggle meth? With companies that poisoned our people under the name of agriculture? No, we will let everyone see the truth. An hour later, the entire dossier was uploaded to an open diplomatic platform, accessible to any journalist, scholar, or citizen. No redactions, no classified stamps. A small African nation had chosen to lay everything bare. By morning, international media was in uproar. Western outlets framed it cautiously. Burkina Faso halts aid convoy, diplomatic tensions rise. Others sowed doubt. Authenticity of released documents questioned. But online, across African communities, the evidence spread like wildfire. Drone images, QR codes matching global databases, forged seals, all undeniable. In Nairobi, law students shared the files on Twitter, writing, "This is no longer Burkina Faso's story, it's Africa's story." In Accra, an economics professor declared on TV, "This proves the aid system has been hijacked. We need to rebuild oversight from the ground up." Western officials reacted sharply. France's foreign ministry urged Burkina Faso to reconsider its interpretation of the data. A European commissioner warned of the risk of self-isolation. But this time, the unexpected happened. African nations began voicing their support. Ghana issued an official statement. "Every nation has the right to inspect cargo within its borders, no matter the logo it carries." Nigeria was more blunt. "If aid becomes a cover for drug trafficking, it is no longer aid." Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traoré stepped onto the presidential balcony that afternoon. Below him, thousands of citizens had gathered spontaneously. They held up hand-painted signs. "No more silence. We have the right to know." He didn't need to speak. The crowd itself was proof that his choice for transparency had struck the right chord. This was no longer a military operation. It had become a historic moment, one where transparency triumphed over silence. And from that day forward, the world understood. Africa would not accept being kept in the dark any longer. As the files spread across the globe, the effect was nothing short of an earthquake. From Washington to Brussels, from Paris to Geneva, every seat of power was forced to respond. In New York, major networks scrambled for coverage. CNN declared, "Burkina Faso publishes shocking evidence of smuggling behind aid fronts." BBC called it a crisis of trust in the global humanitarian system. But online, the hashtag #AfricaSpeaks exploded, trending from Lagos, Nairobi, and Johannesburg to black communities in London, Paris, and New York. Images of containers plastered with NGO logos, yet filled with crystalline drugs, circulated with the caption, "No more silence." In Brussels, a midnight emergency session convened. EU commissioners argued bitterly. Some pushed to dismiss it as an isolated incident. Others warned that silence would be read across Africa as proof of complicity. In Paris, the phones inside the Élysée Palace rang nonstop. Mining firms, pharmaceutical companies, and international logistics giants applied pressure, fearing expanded investigations would expose decades of shady contracts. One senior advisor said bluntly in the meeting, "If Burkina Faso can do this, tomorrow Nigeria, Congo, or Mali will too. And when that happens, the whole system we've built for decades could unravel." In Washington, State Department officials weighed two options: stay silent and let Europe handle it, or intervene to shape the narrative. Eventually, a bland statement was released. The U.S. was deeply concerned and closely monitoring the situation. But such vague diplomacy did nothing to stem the tide of public outrage. Meanwhile, in Addis Ababa, the headquarters of the African Union, the atmosphere was entirely different. For the first time in years, delegations from 15 West and Central African nations sat together, not to be lectured by international organizations, but to decide their own course. A Ghanaian diplomat said it plainly: "We cannot let the world write this story for us anymore. This is the moment Africa proves it is ready to stand on its own." Unity quickly turned into action. Nigeria, Algeria, and South Africa pledged investigative teams to support Burkina Faso. Mali and Guinea proposed auditing all aid shipments from the past 5 years. Even leaders from Sierra Leone and Tanzania, nations usually wary of controversy, publicly endorsed Traoré's decision for transparency. On the streets of Ouagadougou, spontaneous rallies erupted. Citizens danced, waved flags, and lifted signs reading, "If they fear the truth, then we must speak it louder." It wasn't just national pride. It was Africans realizing, perhaps for the first time, that their collective voice was forcing the world to listen. The diplomatic earthquake didn't fade overnight. It rolled into a wave, spilling from conference rooms into parliaments, from news anchors to neighborhood cafes. And at its center loomed the question: would Burkina Faso withstand the pressure, or had it just sparked the beginning of a new world order? In that moment, Traoré was already preparing his next move, a move that would turn this international scandal into a manifesto for Africa's future. The next morning, while European newspapers scrambled to spin their headlines, a very different announcement echoed through Ouagadougou. Traoré unveiled a bold new plan called Operation Sahara Sands, Clean Corridor. This wasn't just a political statement, it was a blueprint for real change. 11 key border posts across the Sahel would be equipped with high-resolution scanning systems, capable of analyzing every type of cargo, from rice and fertilizer to chemical drums. No matter whose logo appeared on the containers, be it the UN, the EU, or the most prestigious NGOs, everything would be inspected. For a moment, the people of Burkina Faso sat in stunned silence. Then, applause erupted in the capital's main square. An elderly man stood, holding up a handmade sign: "No more free pass for fake humanitarians." The ripple spread quickly. Nigeria pledged to deploy similar tech at its Tamba corridor. Algeria sent engineers to help construct border scanning posts. South Africa offered artificial intelligence to analyze continental cargo data. Within weeks, a network of unprecedented cooperation began to form, laying the foundation for Africanet Clean Transit, a continent-wide oversight system. The most remarkable part? None of it came from Western financial institutions. There were no foreign experts writing thick reports. It was Africans who designed, implemented, and refined the system. As one Ghanaian diplomat put it at a press conference, "This is no longer a dream. This is our work, built by our hands, powered by our minds." Meanwhile, Western outlets continued their spin. They described the meth-filled containers as medical transport errors. They warned of the humanitarian consequences of tighter inspections. But this time, unlike before, their narrative wasn't swallowed whole. Africans had seen the truth with their own eyes. They had heard directly from soldiers, from village chiefs, from their young president himself. Trust no longer belonged to Paris or New York. It had returned to the people, shared through phones, markets, and gatherings beneath baobab trees. Operation Sahara Sands became more than a security measure. It became a symbol of maturity, of writing new rules instead of obeying old ones imposed from outside. A South African journalist captured it best. This feels like Africa's immune system, finally reacting after decades of being invaded under the label of assistance. This time, the body fought back. And through the noise of international media, one truth stood clear. A new foundation was being laid, not just to protect Burkina Faso, but to signal that Africa, for the first time in generations, was stepping into an era of self-determination. Traoré kept his words short. At a press conference, he simply said, "We do not seek confrontation. We seek cleanliness for our land, for our trade, for the future of our children." The statement was simple, but it carried far. Because the world understood, when a continent decides to stand, no outdated system can hold it back. As the last truck was sealed and the sun dipped low over the tin rooftops of Ouagadougou, people understood they had just witnessed a turning point. Not just the largest drug bust in Burkina Faso's history, but a moment when an entire continent declared, "We will no longer remain silent." Across the streets, citizens poured out, not to celebrate a military victory, but to embrace a deeper truth, that their security and dignity would no longer be decided in distant conference rooms, but on the very soil where they stood. A mother holding her child told a local reporter, "Tonight, I can look into my baby's eyes and believe that tomorrow he will grow up in a country that knows how to protect itself." Meanwhile, across the ocean, offices in Paris, Brussels, and New York stayed lit late into the night. But no matter how hard they worked, they couldn't hide the reality. The old privilege of defining Africa's story was slipping away. And then, as the dust settled, Traoré stood before the crowd. No microphone, no lengthy speech. Just one simple sentence, etched into the hearts of everyone there. "We are no longer beggars, we are guardians." That line spread across social media, across borders, becoming a rallying cry for Africa's youth. Because they understood that history isn't just written in books. It is carved in the brave actions of a generation that refuses to bow. And that lesson is for us too, for anyone watching from afar. There are moments when you must choose to stand with truth, even if it means standing against an entire system. Because power may twist laws, but it can never extinguish the human will to live in freedom and dignity.